we are going to take the time to dive into the language standards and discuss the importance of using social language to develop academic English. How often do you intentionally include a focus on the language standards in instruction specific to grade level language standards? The language standards focus on the development of academic English. Some advocates for equity consider this a racist or biased approach because it lifts a specific kind of English. This is a complicated and nuanced issue, but there is a place for the grammar of academic English and the students' variants or native languages in the classroom. We are going to tackle this throughout the week. And I also want you to understand that this ties into how students use language when speaking, linked to speaking and listening standards, which call out the use of language. I want us to think about the connection between social, home language, and academic English. Lisa Delpit, author of Other People's Children, Cultural Conflict in the Classroom, makes this point. May I have someone read the quote for me, please? We can honor our students' home languages and teach them what they need to know in order to participate fully in our society. We don't need to extinguish first languages or dialects, but we can add additional languages to their repertoire. Let's take a look at the progression of the language standards. Please take a moment and click on the link that was provided to you, the language progressive skills. And I want us to look at page 30. Giving students access to academic English is the role of the language standards. Just like the foundational skills in reading, equity means that students who need these things explicitly taught get them. This chart from Appendix A of the Common Core, Language Progressive Skills, shows where the specific structures of our language are introduced and where they are practiced over time. I want you to take 5 minutes to look at this document and think about your own curriculum. To what extent are you introducing, reinforcing, and practicing these standards where they are expected? What does practicing them in non-threatening, real communicative context look like? At the end of the 5 minutes, I do want us to take a moment to discuss this thinking at our tables. Excuse me. I will count down from 3 when I am ready for you guys to come back to me in a whole group manner. Back to me in 3, 2, 1. Great job. You've had an opportunity to think about these questions. And now I want you to discuss the bullets with a shoulder partner for the next 4 minutes while I circulate and just listen in to some of the conversations. You may begin. Back to me in 3, 2, 1. Guys, I heard some really insightful thinking. Yes, we want to be intentional about what is being assessed. And if students are using their home language in an assessment and there is a specific language component, then they need to be using the academic English language. But if they are using home language to get an answer, connects learning, often that is not a problem. This is where affirming instruction comes in. And we will continue to address this more deeply on Wednesday. I do want to note that while we looked at the progression of the language skills in academic English, that is in addition to the standards. If you are not familiar with the language standards, you do have access to the staircase of complexity and other standards within the Common Core, and I implore you to take the time to familiarize yourself with these standards. When we define academic English in the Common Core, the standards categorize them into 3 tiers. And this is going to be tier 1, 2, and tier 3 words. When we think about tier 1 words, we're thinking about the words that we are using in everyday speech. This is entry-level English proficiency, even for our monolingual children. When we are thinking about words that we use every day, we're also thinking about words that are often referred to as sight words: the, she, they. When we start to think about tier 2 words, we're referring to the words that are considered academic language. These are not the words that we use in everyday conversation. And these words typically are more academic language that you would find in a book that you were reading. These words have multiple meanings, and these words are subtle or precise ways to say something relatively simple. So instead of saying I ate the cupcake, I could say I devoured the cupcake. Or instead of saying I stared at the stars, I gazed at the stars. When we start to think about tier 3 vocabulary, now we're getting into more domain specific, more technical vocabulary. These words that we find in tier 3 academic language, these are required for English level proficiency. However, these words, and additionally, excuse me, these words are also key to understanding content, as they are most likely tied to domain specific content. These words are more challenging, and they're also the least used by students and by educators. When we think about the tier 3 words, it's important for us to note that our multilingual students are the only ones who are assessed on this kind of vocabulary. Because of their specificity and their close ties to the content knowledge, tier 3 words are far more common in informational text. And when we're thinking about concepts in biology or chemistry, mathematics, you will find a lot more tier 3 vocabulary. These are not words that we're using every day, and they're not commonly found in the literature that we would pick up to read for enjoyment. For our discussion now, we are going to focus on tier 2 words that students need mastery of to speak academically. However, I do want us to note that it's important for us to understand and teach tier 2 vocabulary when we are working with our multilingual students, but tier 2 words will only get them to the intermediate level proficiency of the English, the academic English. I want us to consider the inclusion of home language in relation to the speaking and listening standards during instruction. What should students use? Well, excuse me, when should students use academic English? What is the place of a student's native language or variant in the classroom? I want you to take time to discuss these 2 questions with a partner, and I am going to just circulate and monitor the discussion. Awesome. Thank you for coming back together so quickly. I love that I hear when students should be using academic English is when it is dependent on the demand of the standard and the focus of the lesson. During those discussions where you need to hear academic language, it should be used. When learning new vocabulary, we should be using academic English. However, it's also important to note that students' native and social languages are often an inroad to making those connections to new and academic vocabulary in the English language. What is the place of a student's native language variant in the classroom? Processing, peer or low stakes conversation, peer collaboration, those non-formal writing assignments, when students are able to write poetry, fictional narration, dialogue, those are definitely places where students can use their native language in the classroom? Okay, we've had an opportunity to watch the video, and I want us to take some time to debrief the video from the previous slide. All right, back to me in 3, 2, 1. Thank you for taking the opportunity to discuss the questions on the screen with your peers, colleagues. I want us to just briefly, I just want to reiterate some of the key points that I heard as we engaged in conversation. The limits of your language are the limits of your world. And we talked about, I heard talk about how this is such a powerful statement. We should be allowing our students to use English variants to process, but we also want them to own academic English to access all areas of their life without neglecting their home language. Looking at the academic English as its own variant, but still being able to use their academic English to expand their vocabularies and understand language and broaden their capacity to learn and communicate complex ideas. When students should be using academic language, anytime they're engaging in text with tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary, anytime there is an audience dependent informational writing or audience dependent informational speaking and listening. What is the place of students' native language or variant in the classroom? It has a space processing through written or spoken language, audience-dependent informational writing, blogs, journals, note-taking, notes that they're sharing, audience-dependent literature writing, a short story, poetry, novel. These are all spaces where they can utilize their native languages or variants to engage them in the classroom and reaffirm their language. What are the implications for planning and teaching? Studying the language demands of a complex text, juxtaposing them with the language practices of your students, identifying those opportunities in instruction for students to close study the language, as well as inviting students to translate complex text into their home language. Call to action. I want us to just place emphasis on the idea that language is a place of intersectionality and what we encourage, accept, and teach in the classroom. Everyone in this room has a language passport. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. Our job is to empower students with that passport as well, because that passport gives our students the opportunity to engage in society and instructional spaces freely. I also want to draw attention to the fact that federal and state laws require English learners to demonstrate English proficiency, even in a country, ours, that has no official language. The language students speak at home should be valued equally, as it is a part of their identity and it is interwoven with love, community, pride, and belonging. Calling one's home language incorrect, ignorant, wrong, or less than sends the students a message about their personal worth. Since economic success in the United States is tied to proficiency in academic English, and you are accountable for ensuring students leave your class with grade level proficiency in academic English, you should tend to the language demands of the grade level text and task, and leverage the structures of students' home languages as inroads to English. Now that we've had the opportunity to look at the language standards, I do want us to move forward with analyzing the writing standards to unpack the grade level demands. The writing standards, which are an often overlooked set of standards, but important to attend to because are important, excuse me, to attend to because they work in tandem with the reading standards.